All right, good stuff. I imagine a few more will kind of filter in as we get started, but let me introduce myself first. So my name is Nick. The name of my tutoring service is The College Lad, and I primarily work with students on SATs and ACTs, but as an extension of some of those testing strategies, I also work a lot with students this time of year on their APs as well. Um, I was just doing a presentation on the U.S. history. If you guys happen to also be taking that test, excuse me, if you guys happen to be taking that test as well, I'll be doing another presentation on that next week. You guys can see the full schedule. We'll link to it at the end of this presentation. Um, so I want to go through a few things with you guys. I think AP language for whatever reason was my favorite AP class back in the day. I learned a ton from it, and as much as that stuff is like super valuable, and like I use it every single day. Like the things I learned about like how to structure a good argument, how to explain somebody else's argument, how to piece together individual pieces of evidence, like that. Those are like really really useful, valuable skills, and I think this is like one of the cases where passing this test, getting college credit is super, super well justified. That said, even if you know how to do this stuff really well, even if you've really crushed the class, it's easy to miss out on a lot of low hanging fruit in terms of how the free responses are scored and in terms of how to approach the multiple choice section. It's not that it's like a complete waste if like, you dominated the class and like you got an A, but like, okay, you only got a 3 on the exam, so you don't get credit. It's not a waste. Like you still did well with it. It's still going to look good on your transcript that you got an A, but it's kind of a missed opportunity in terms of like getting credit for the class and then maybe having like one kind of extra like star on your record, like when it comes to colleges actually evaluating your application. Um, so I want to go through a couple things. I want to start with the test format. Then we're going to look at specific strategies for both the multiple choice questions and the free response questions. First off, the test format. So if you guys are taking, if this is not your first AP, then this probably looks pretty familiar where it's split into two halves. We've got the multiple choice half, we've got the free response half. I would say this test, to my eye, is at the slower side in terms of the pacing. That is offset by the fact that it requires some pretty careful analysis on the multiple choice section in particular. It's not dramatically slow or anything. It's not like you get a full 2 minutes per question. It's just that you get more than 1 minute. That obviously does build in some reading time as well. But as long as you're, reading quickly and answering the questions fairly quickly, the time is manageable, but important to keep an eye on. As with a lot of other APs, the scoring fairly evenly split between the multiple choice and the free response. You're looking at 45% versus 55%. We'll go into the multiple choice question types some more, but you guys might realize this, but this test was actually supposed to be redesigned last year. Obviously, a huge wrench got thrown in that by something called coronavirus. You guys might have heard of it. And they had to basically scrap the new test that they were going to do. And the whole AP last year was just a rhetorical analysis. So this year is actually the first iteration of this version of the test with the way that they're structuring the questions, which makes preparing for it somewhat frustrating because there's so many good prep materials and resources for the multiple choice online, but all of those are suddenly obsolete because of the new composition, which is like the writing question type. Um, that said, about half of the reading questions, or about half of the multiple choice questions, will still be traditional reading comprehension questions. If you guys are taking SAT or ACT, they're quite similar to the reading comprehension on those sections. Same tricks and strategies will apply. We'll talk about some of those a little bit later on too. The free response section broken into 3 questions. First one is a synthesis essay. That's kind of the AP Lang tests version of a DBQ. If you guys have ever taken a history exam, DBQ is a document-based question for those of you who have not, and it requires you to actually use documents that they give you and consider them as pieces of evidence in constructing an argument. The other 2 essays, first off, is the rhetorical analysis. This one is the same as the old SAT essay, which they got rid of this last year. But again, same tricks. If you guys happen to be prepping for SAT essay for whatever reason, or if you guys are seniors and you took SAT last year when it still had the essay, this is going to be actually the same task, and a lot of the same tricks of the trade will definitely apply. We'll talk about how to prepare for that. Finally, you have the argument essay, which is pretty much the synthesis essay again, except you don't get the stimulus, you don't get the documents themselves. You need to construct your own argument yourself. Um, so we'll be talking about this some more, but you know, there are differences between the print and the digital version of the test. So we can discuss in more detail if you guys have questions on it, the digital version of the test in particular. I'm going to primarily be focusing on the paper version just because that's the default, but I'll be chiming in whenever there's a substantial difference between the two. There's one really big difference in multiple choice that we'll discuss, but with the free response, the order will be different. It'll start with the argument, then the synthesis, then finally the rhetorical analysis. That's on the digital version of the test. So if this is your first AP, then you probably have read by now that the raw score is, or that your raw score, as in the number of questions you got right and the number of points you score, is converted to an AP score of 1 through 5. Most colleges will give credit for a 4 or a 5. That can vary somewhat at different schools. Some only give credit for 5. Others will give credit for a 3. But regardless, like, you know, assuming you guys are like taking the time to sit down for this webinar and join us, like I'm guessing you guys are pretty on it and probably want to score a 5 on this test. A lot of times people are surprised to learn that to get a 5, you only need to score around 75% of the available points to do so on this test. That means you can get a C on this test and get the equivalent of an A in a college level class, which is really, really nice to have because as hard as these questions are, getting 75% of the available points is very achievable, particularly on the free response section where like by knowing the rubric really well, by knowing what's expected, like by knowing what earns you points and what doesn't, you can steal a lot of low hanging fruit, like I alluded to earlier. So let's dive into the multiple choice bit first. Like I said, I a lot of my work is related to SATs and ACTs. So you know, multiple choice is like a big part of my life, as absurd as that is to say. So I think like by strategically approaching this, you can really shave off a lot of unnecessary incorrect answers, and you can save yourself a lot of time. So I know you guys in your class, or you know, not a lot of people self-prep for this exam, but if you guys happen to be self-prepping, you've probably created some kind of strategy with, like, you know, whether to read the questions first or read the passage first. And different teachers teach different things on this. Even like again on SAT, ACT, different tutors teach different things on how to actually go about reading the passage itself. So here's my suggestion. I've always tried to make these things like as flexible where you can give and take bits and pieces of it without having to use all of it. You will not hurt my feelings. I will not even know about it if you only take some of it or none of it. But this is my suggestion. And hopefully the way I lay out my argument for why I think this approach is best will be somewhat compelling, and you guys will incorporate some elements into how you approach it because I think it'll help you do better. So I think read the passage first. I know there's some people will say, oh, read the question so you know what to look for. But I think what can happen is that certain questions like become a lot easier. Number one, if you have knowledge of the surrounding context, and if you kind of get like just roughly what the bigger picture of the essay actually is. Another thing is that sometimes they'll ask you sort of a detail-oriented question that they might talk about multiple times in the passage. If that does happen and you're just looking for that exact detail, you'll probably want to answer based on the first time you see it, when actually it's more appropriately answered based on the second reference to that particular detail in the passage. So read the passage quickly at first, not a skim, but you shouldn't stop just because you're confused or you don't understand something either. Think of it as a roadmap to the overall passage, like what generally is included here and what is not included. Now, I know I said that having context is helpful, but try to refrain from like jumping to a conclusion about like some kind of like mental summary or just some kind of like internal statement about like, oh, this passage was about X. And like, you know, a lot of times I know that that can kind of be like relieving to like feel like you understood it. If you can make some kind of general statement about what was in the passage, like it can feel like a relief that you kind of like knew what was there. However, that's going to be kind of distracting, if anything else, because you're going to want to be picking answers that relate to your idea of what the text was all about, even when the answers are actually asking about small details. So try to avoid coming to any kind of overall summary judgment. Now, likewise, I also suggest, I know sometimes people learn to like read a multiple choice question and come up with their own answer first based on the read of the passage. Personally, I really disagree with that approach. I know it has its merits where I think sometimes people will like, kind of get trapped by a lot of wrong answers because it has individual appealing elements. But if you guys follow along with what I'm about to suggest, that will not be necessary. And I think the real danger of filling in your own answer is the same thing as coming to a summary judgment of what the passage was all about. It's that you have this kind of fixed idea in your head of what makes the most sense, but that may not be what the College Board presents you with as an answer here. So so it's better in my opinion to work from the answer choices offered and to approach it with a process of elimination. Don't try to choose the correct answer, try to eliminate all the wrong answers. Um, so we'll discuss process of elimination a bit more on the next slide in more detail. But in terms of your overall approach, this is where paper and digital are unfortunately going to diverge. So I suggest if you're taking it in paper, start with the straightforward questions asking what the passage said about things, right? Just asking you to find details or explain small sections of it. Then move on to the more challenging overall conceptual questions about the organization of the passage or about its ideas. The point of this is that number one, it makes sure that you're basically doing the easier questions first, giving you an opportunity to build comprehension before trying to tackle the more difficult material. The second side of this, and why I really want you guys to, even if you're taking the digital version where you can't skip questions, you have to do them in order, it gets you thinking about what type of question am I answering? It keeps your eye on what exactly is being asked here. Um, so if it is asking you to just find information, you do just that. But if it's asking about the purpose of something or the function of something, or asking like if the author uses a quotation in order to blank, that's not asking you what the passage said. It's asking you why the author is making a particular choice. Yes, that is going to be closely related to what's on the page, but it's not the same thing as restating the same information there. So in digital, still use your process of elimination. You just lose that small edge of being able to skip over the more difficult questions, build comprehension first, then return to them. The last thing is to keep moving. So you guys are going to have 5 passages on here over the course of an hour. That's 12 minutes per passage. A lot of times people ask me about how long to spend reading. I would say you want to spend about 2 minutes reading. Probably for the longer passage anyway. For the shorter ones, it's probably going to be more like 1 minute. The passages tend to get a little bit shorter as you go along. So it's not easy to say. Well, it's easy to say, okay, you have an average of 12 minutes per passage, but it's less valuable because most of the passages will be longer in the beginning and shorter at the end. So 12 minutes is going to be not quite enough earlier on and then way too much later on. So my rule of thumb is 5 minutes for every 4 questions. So if you have a 12 question passage, that's 3 times 4, that's 15. I know you guys thought this was a language test. Secretly, there's a tiny math component, but that's so the fifth 15 minutes for a 12 question passage, that's going to keep you on better pace. Then if you have like a 5 question passage, you're like, okay, I've got a little bit more than 5 minutes. I got about 6 minutes to work on this. Keep an eye on the clock, keep moving is really the key to it. You shouldn't be dwelling, even if you're taking the digital version. If you can get an answer down but you don't know what to do with the last couple, just put an answer and move on. At any given time, you want to be you only want to be a little you want to only want to have spent a little bit more time than the question number you're on. So if you're on question 30, you want to not be much more than 30 to 35 minutes in. Let's talk about process of elimination some more. So there's a really common misconception with multiple choice questions, especially those that come from the College Board, that there are multiple possible answers and that one is somehow just better than another. This is not true. The College Board has really specific rules about what makes answers right and wrong, and the things that make answers wrong make them wrong. Not just valid, but somehow inferior to the other. They are specifically incorrect. So think about it from their perspective. Like writing is open to interpretation. What someone really meant is up to the reader's judgment in a lot of ways to decide without getting way into a rabbit hole about literary theory. But basically, like if you read something, you can kind of interpret it in different ways. And who's to say that your interpretation is wrong and someone else is right, or vice versa, that yours is right, someone else's is wrong. So the College Board has to dodge this issue in order to avoid lawsuits. What they do is they plant errors in wrong answers, or they frame the answers in ways that makes them incorrect. That can be as small as an individual word or a small phrase in a longer answer, or it can be the overall meaning of a given answer choice. The three things to look out for are down at the bottom of the page right there. So, what the types of problems that they plant are things that contradict the passage, number one. Things that directly go against what it said. That could be as small as one word, maybe a word like always or never, that, is the gist of it is right. Maybe most of the time it happens or most of the time it doesn't happen, but it's not actually always or never. Look out for stuff like that. If you see something contradicted in the passage, then you can cross that answer off immediately. The second one is tough, but really, really important. That is absent or irrelevant ideas that you need to have a reach to justify. A lot of times, as we're saying, different interpretations can be valid, but you'd have to kind of stretch what's actually there or connect ideas or like bring in things that the author does not talk about explicitly. Those things cannot be correct answers on here. They have to stick to what's actually on the page and what's actually said. So if you find yourself having to make an assumption or justify an answer to yourself, or you need to like read between the lines or infer a lot, that's an incorrect answer. That answer cannot be correct. They are masters at writing lots of plausible sounding answers that can be justified, but you can't pick those. So this is a big part of that frame shift from looking for the right answer to eliminating wrong answers. It's going to keep you from falling for a lot of the traps and avoid that thing where you have to kind of like fill out your own answer in advance based on the multiple choice question. The way I tend to approach these, and I encourage you guys to do a bit of practice doing this beforehand. We'll actually have an opportunity to do it in a minute too. Is when you're doing multiple choice, do some of it untimed, and don't only pick the answer you think is right. Explain why all the wrong answers are wrong, and frankly, you guys should be able to categorize them as in the way that we have here with contradictions, absent information, or taken out of context. That is something that's true in the passage, but it doesn't answer this question in particular. So you should be able to categorize all wrong answers as one or more of those. Um, that will be a little bit time consuming at first to think about, but the more you do it over the next couple of weeks leading up to your test, the more second nature it's going to be and the faster you'll be at doing it. When you actually sit down to take this, it's going to help you catch a lot of wrong answers. This is meant more than anything else to deal with that situation all of us face. We're like, okay, you know that two of them are wrong, and you're stuck with the rest. You're like, oh man, and like inevitably we end up going with the one that we kind of like more. It's like, oh, that seems right because I remember that thing in the passage. It's just that that's going to lead to a lot of mistakes with half right, half wrong answers. If you instead flip the script and you focus on, okay, yes, that half is right and it's appealing, but this other half of the answer, they don't say it, that answer is wrong. It has to be the other one, even though the other one doesn't jump out as correct. You're going to score a lot more points on here. Okay, so my apologies for the slight blurriness here, you guys. It was pointed out to me that this is not transmitting as well as I would like it to across the presentation. So as long as this is somewhat readable, I want us to take a couple minutes. I'm going to give us about 5 minutes total to work through this, probably a little bit less than that. But read through the passage and then look at the first three questions that are listed right there. What I want you guys to think about is not only what the correct answer is, but also what's wrong with the wrong answers. Try to categorize them as we did: contradicted, absent, or doesn't answer the question, taken out of context. So take a few minutes. I'm actually just going to set a timer here. And you guys go for it. And what we'll do right after that is I'll give you guys the right answer, and then we'll talk about what's making the wrong answers wrong in one of these, and we can discuss it some more in the Q&A past that. Take about another 30 seconds to a minute, you guys. All right, cool. So I gave you guys about 4 minutes there, by the way, to get through 3 questions. I mean, the pace. I wouldn't be surprised if it was kind of tough to get through 3 questions in that amount of time because, like, it involves reading the passage and only doing the 3 questions. When the reading time is kind of like prorated and parceled out over the course of several other questions, it kind of like you'd like if like it would feel easier to get this done if I had given you like 13 minutes to do the entire 10 questions, for example. So it's okay if you didn't finish it super quickly. You're as long as you're making progress and you've answered like one and you're kind of like getting towards the second, you're probably more or less okay on pace right there. So these are the correct answers here. So 12 should be D, 13 C, and 14 B. I want to talk about number 12. Like I said before, I'm happy to revisit 13 and 14 in the Q&A after I finish the presentation if you guys want to discuss them. I just don't want to spend the whole time talking about these specific multiple choice questions. I just want to go through the wrong answers in 12 and kind of point out some stuff that the College Board is planting there to make them incorrect. So 12, so for 12, Terry never focused on one career. She was skilled at so many things. It does mention that she did a lot of different things. However, it does not mention that she was skilled at all of them. That's a pretty classic overanalysis, jumping to a conclusion type thing. So you get the sense that she was quite a capable person, but it never actually says that. So that's the sort of like, inference, coming to a conclusion, drawing reasonable conclusions as a reader that weirdly you guys are learning to do in school. Then all of a sudden on standardized tests, you kind of have to throw out a little bit. It's reasonable to guess that she was skilled at many things, but the passage never says it. On this and other similar tests, that is just not correct. Like, you just can't come to that conclusion. Um, B is kind of a weird answer. Terry was so clever an actress that her portrayal of a role seemed to change every night. There's a couple things going wrong there. Number one, it's a little bit of like taken out of context, where it's reading the different roles that she had as particular like actual characters she played, but that's taken out of context. Is not what that section down around line 40 is actually saying. Um, with C, Shaw encouraged Terry to become a playwright by carefully tutoring her and creating plots and characters. Again, it's just something that's not actually it's not actually stated, and in fact, Shaw didn't actually tutor her. They were just kept in contact, and it doesn't say anything about how he taught her to write either. D ends up being correct. So because she lacked confidence in her writing, she never fully realized that she was like a capable writer. D doesn't sound like it's saying that. It sounds like it's saying something else. But D is the only one here that isn't incorrect. She did lack confidence in certain skills. She was a person of rare talent and gifts. Finally, E, because she did not have a natural talent for writing or acting, never says that, right? It suggests that she lacked confidence in her writing, but it never says she did not have a natural talent for it. Nor does it say that she became great through sheer willpower. Again, we get this sense of like a very capable, ferocious woman who's like really going for it and like is propelling herself forward, but it doesn't say that she became great through sheer willpower anyway. It sort of implies that she became great, but it doesn't say that it was all about willpower. Um, so again, I'm happy to discuss that a bit more in the Q&A, as well as 13 and 14, because I know like sometimes, like you guys might have had other thoughts that were outside the scope of what I said. So feel free to throw those in the Q&A when it's time. Okay, so I just wanted to show this to you guys again. I don't want to use our whole time on multiple choice, but this is a passage that is, instead of that last passage was reading questions, these are going to be the writing or composition questions instead. So you don't need to read the passage, but take a look at just the way these questions are phrased. So 9 is, which of the following, if placed before sentence 1, would both capture the audience's interest and provide the most effective introduction to the topic of the paragraph? Um, so here, like, we're being asked not what's in the passage or what isn't, or like, or what's it saying, or what are the ideas, but we're actually making active revisions to it, taking into account what specifically we're trying to accomplish. So notice that there are two things here. If we're doing process of elimination, we would want to eliminate anything that isn't going to capture the audience's interest and isn't going to provide an introduction to the topic of the paragraph. By the way, quick suggestion, when you're doing process of elimination on two things like that, start with the easier one. Don't try to do the harder one first. I think the idea of capturing interest is kind of vague and difficult to evaluate. Start with provide the most effective introduction. Take a second, look at 10, 11, 12 as well. But yeah, all of those are asking about how to frame the information, how to present it, what order it should come in. If we have a little bit of extra time at the end, I'm actually going to come back and we can revisit these, but I'm going to go really quick so you guys can't see the answers too fast. All right. By the way, those same questions are in the College Board guide to the AP, the course exam and description to the AP language exam. So feel free to, you can also go back and read those passages more fully in there if you want them. You can just feel they sent a link to my profile at the beginning. They'll send another one at the end. Feel free to shoot me a quick message on my page, and I'll send you a link to the course exam and description if you can't find it for whatever reason. All right, so moving on from multiple choice, heading into the free response section. Couple things to think about. So I was kind of alluding to this a minute ago when I was talking about the multiple choice section, where yeah, we're learning in our English classes to analyze, to read between the lines, to infer, to draw conclusions. Then all of a sudden we have to throw it out on the multiple choice. In the same way, a lot of the things that we do to get A's on our papers, or like to do well and write effectively and communicate and draw an audience in, are not going to earn us points on this test. And it's one thing that kind of is a great flaw of this test that they try to make up for with a certain aspect of the scoring that we'll come around to. It's the sophistication. The sophistication or complexity score. People call it different things, but they try to offset it by like rewarding great essays with that extra point. But for the most part, doing some technical things really well is going to score you just as many points as writing exceptionally well is. Obviously, your writing should mechanically be clear. You want to write as well as you can, but writing well and like, really analyzing a point, or like, making an especially great point or expressing it in a really cool way, honestly is secondary to actually doing the things that they are looking for. So for all of these, for the purposes of the synthesis in some ways and the argument in some ways, you want to know your rhetorical techniques. You want to know what effective writing really is, but you also got to know the name for those things for that rhetorical analysis section. You want to have a bank of techniques well, and some things that you can like always like dig in your back pocket for and focus on if nothing is jumping out to you about this essay. So you'll get 40 minutes to write each one of these. They give you an extra 15 minutes to read the documents for the synthesis. Obviously, you guys should know that you definitely want to outline. I'll talk about what I think is like sort of like the minimum outline, what you want to be doing when you outline for these different essays. One other suggestion, it's not part of the outline necessarily, but it's to focus on your transitions. Transitions are a really important part of writing, but if you can organize your transitions before you really start writing, that's a good way to know that you understand the relationship between your ideas. There's kind of this temptation to just kind of like, all right, lay out this one idea, then this other idea. But by thinking in advance about how one leads to another, how am I going to transition? It forces you to get in that headspace of how are these two things linked? Are they just 2 points about the same thing? Are they subtly different in some way? Is one kind of contrasting with the other? All of those are going to help you write better thesis statements and write better topic sentences that are going to make for more compelling essays in ways that actually score more points. For the scoring, so the 3 essays are scored 0 to 6. Keep in mind that 75% is our benchmark to score a 5 on this, 75% of available points. That means you don't need to write a 6 essay on all of these to do well. If you like really have a tough time on one of them and like you can only pick up like 2 or 3 points, which should honestly be kind of a cakewalk on some of these if you do a couple things, then you can get away with only if you get a 5 on one of the other sections or a 6 on one of the other essays, you're still at that 75% benchmark. Or if you guys follow the rubric, it's almost a sure bet that if you know your terms, if you're able to follow along the directions clearly, you will have no problem scoring a 4 on all these essays. So we will take a look in close detail at those soon. All right, so the synthesis approach, like we said, is like an AP history DBQ where you have the 3 different documents. We'll be sure to outline. That's on the next slide. My big reminder is to make sure you take a stance on the actual issue. A lot of people kind of read the documents. They're like, ooh, they're trying to like lead me towards this conclusion or that conclusion. You know, you'll get a feel for like what they're trying to like get you to say. That's a little bit of an illusion, to be honest with you. There are infinite possible responses to the synthesis essays. Yeah, they naturally tend to kind of present like a dichotomy about how you want to like about a particular issue, but that doesn't mean that you have to only take exactly one side or the other. You can take very nuanced positions on either side of an issue, or even present kind of an X factor. So essential ingredients for your outline here. So you definitely want to have a thesis statement, and you definitely want to have your topic sentences. In the same way I was describing, like that you want to know your transitions, knowing your topic sentences and how they relate to your thesis is enough to know what your overall argument looks like. I think a lot of times people just go into detail way too quickly with their topic sentences in all sorts of writing. You want topic sentences to explain how the connection between this evidence and the thesis. Um, for example, if my thesis is that like freedom is good, my first paragraph might be about like freedom is good because it has a lot of benefits. That's a topic sentence, right? It's saying, okay, I'm going to list out some benefits. These benefits explain why freedom is good. That's what a topic sentence really should do. Simplistic example, but it is the model for what we want to be following along with here too. Within each paragraph, you also want to have 2 to 3 examples. That means citing 2 or 3 of the documents. We'll talk about why that is. Or actually, we can talk about it now. So you want to make sure that you use at least 4 of the documents. That's part of the scoring. You get a point for using 3 of them. However, the way you get the point is not just by citing them, it's by citing them and analyzing and explaining them. So there's a chance that you may refer to a document yet not earn the point for actually referring to it. So if you use 4, you give yourself slightly more wiggle room. I say use more than 4. I say try to use 5 or 6. A lot of times you can actually draw a really you can actually provided you can have a thesis that embodies all of them in some way, you can get a really nuanced presentation of the issue. But some sense of like, here's what's good about the other side, but here's what's right about my side. That's a way to incorporate all the evidence, also earn that sophistication point while still taking a stance on the matter at hand. So I said start with the analysis, not the thesis. And this is a way of dealing with the difficulty of like a lot of times if you start with your position on the matter, you'll see some of the documents that disagree with you and you're going to be like, wait, how do I use this? This goes against me. Should I just ignore it? Well, if instead you can think about like, you start with the documents and think almost as like a way of connecting them all together. How can I connect the dots here? That gives you a way of writing a thesis that does exactly that. How can I reflect reflect all these documents in some way in my thesis? Usually, yeah, that's by presenting both sides of the matter at hand. Here's the actual scoring rubric for the synthesis essay right off the bat. So right off the bat, we have the thesis. At this point, guys should be getting it 100% of the time. It doesn't need to be right or wrong. It doesn't need to be debatable. It doesn't need to be like something that's clearly right and everyone agrees with, or is like the right way to respond to the stimulus. It just needs to be a defensible response to the question at hand. You just need to take a side. That's really it. You will get this point. This is really where the rubber meets the road, is with the evidence and commentary points. So I want you guys to notice some of the differences between getting, say, 1 and 2 points versus 2 and 3 versus 3 and 4. So to score 1 point, all you need to do is refer to two of the sources, right? You can summarize what it says, but if you do, and you don't even need to connect it to your argument, as long as you refer to two, you will score that point. If though, with at least three of the documents, you can not only refer to them, but also connect them to your thesis, to your reasoning, to the point you're trying to make, that is going to get you a second point. Finally, if you can do it with three, you'll get 3 or 4 points. If you can hit three of the sources, hit three of the documents, but also explain how each one of those three or more connects to the thesis. So I keep talking about connecting to the thesis. Let's talk about how we can actually go about doing that. Really simple. When you guys are introducing a document, you should follow the same formula. You should introduce it by summarizing its contents, leading into a quote of it. Then you should follow up that quote with an explanation of how that document connects to the point you're trying to make in the body paragraph. So again, if your topic sentences are doing the work of linking the paragraph to the thesis, then all your explanation has to do after the quote is link that quote to the topic sentence of the paragraph. So that's how all those strings are holding together in the essay overall. So if you guys do that for three, if you guys follow that exact model for more than three of these, again, I suggest doing it for 4 or 5 because you may not get credit for 1 or 2. If you can do that, you will get the 4 points and you are well on your way to getting a 5 on this test. Finally, they also have the sophistication point. This is like, they just want to have an extra point for people that write things exceptionally well. If you write a nuanced thesis that expresses both sides, you're going to get the sophistication point too. Provided you actually address that, provided you're actually addressing the thesis over the course of your essay too. Like you actually do talk about what you say you're going to talk about. All right, cool. Let's move into the rhetorical analysis. The presentation's going to go. I'm going to try to wrap it up in the next 5 or 10 minutes so we can move into the Q&A. So rhetorical analysis, again, this is the same as the old SAT essay. We get back to reading tactics here. Some people really like to annotate in general. They like to mark things up. I think that's great. I don't think, I don't think you need to necessarily summarize all the paragraphs unless that's helpful to you. But I do think there are certain things you can mark down that are specifically helpful, again, with scoring points. The first thing that you want to understand is, what is the writer's main point, or what is their purpose? Why are they writing this thing? What do they hope to communicate? The other thing is the writer's audience. Who is this being expressed to? A lot of times they will tell you directly who it's actually being written to. Other times you might have to infer it. Maybe it's for members of the general public. Maybe it's for members specifically of the academic or scientific community. But think about who the audience is, because that's going to shed a lot of light on why the author is making the choices that they're making. So I mentioned any instances where your pet element is used. We'll get to that on the next slide. These are like your favorite rhetorical tactics or your favorite features of writing that you tend to notice a lot, and you can always come back to if you don't have anything else to write about in this essay. I also said to mark anything that just jumps out to you as interesting, exciting, or important in the essay. Usually if something really grabs your attention, it's because the author did something well. It may be worth taking a second to think about, wait, why did that grab me so much? Is it the way they contrasted it with something else? Is it the effectiveness of the expression? Is it just a really solid piece of evidence, or is it just a funny line? Anything like that is usually a sign that they did something well and therefore was rhetorically effective. So we've got the rhetoric. We've got this idea of the rhetoric bank, and this is the same thing as a pet element. These are different things that to look out for. You don't want to try to track all of these. I would say if you pick 2, you'll always have 2 things to write about in basically any essay. I personally really like writing about the structure of the essays, but that's not for everybody. I like to talk about the way they contrast the beginning and ending. Maybe they broke it into 2 halves. Maybe maybe the way that they began it versus maybe the choice of introduction that they used. So I like to talk about structure, but to be honest with you guys, it's a bit dangerous because structure is really easy to slide into summary. If you're going to talk about the structure, you need to be talking about how the structure reflects the author's purpose, not just summarizing what they do. Another thing you can do is point of view. This gets back to the author's main point and their audience. A lot of times those are helpful for illuminating point of view. You guys, I'm sure, have heard of ethos, logos, pathos, emotional appeals, logical appeals, and appeals to authority / morality. So like, those are all certainly techniques that you could use. Just be sure you're explaining why an emotional appeal is appropriate, for example, or why a logical appeal actually makes sense. You do not have to talk about those to score well. You can write about completely different things. Other options are smaller, use of statistics that won't be in every single essay, a personal anecdote that won't be in every essay. But statistics are like, or like any kind of like a mathematical justification is pretty universally about providing some kind of like, it's really like kind of a form of ethos appeal where it's a type of appeal to authority where it's establishing that something is just factually true. Personal anecdote helps connect the reader with the audience. That's true. Just be sure to also explain why connecting the reader with the audience is important. Is it because the author is trying to make, say, a controversial point, for example? Other things, you can use things like, the different types of imagery that are like effective at grabbing the reader's attention right off the bat. But basically, like, if you pick out two different things that you tend to notice, maybe the way that they describe other people, maybe the way they discuss, maybe like characterization would be one. You can borrow stuff from literature as well. But yeah, keep at least two of these in mind as favorites that you can always fall back on. What is the structure of this thing? What is the point of view of this thing? And that's going to help you lock in on what some other things that you can say about it are. All right. So when outlining this, you definitely need your thesis. You need your 2 to 3 topic sentences, as with the synthesis, is very similar to the other one. In fact, I mean, you can basically write the same ideas. This time, I kind of threw a thesis formula out there for you guys, where you want to start again with your analysis. What are the techniques you notice? What are the things you want to write about? Then circle back around to create your thesis from that. These are the essential ingredients right here. The author communicates that main point that we identified, or their purpose, through the techniques, and you can do up to 3, right? I mean, I think writing 3 might be somewhat difficult in the time provided, but I think definitely writing about 2 is probably necessary to do a really effective essay. Um, what was the other thing? So yes, so author communicates that main point. You can think of this as the what and the how. What are they saying? How are they saying it? The how is the really important part to kind of stick to as well. Um, all right. So I have a sample prompt here. Um, we're actually getting a little bit behind on time, and I want to be sure I can answer you guys' questions. I was going to read through this with you guys, but this actually just comes directly from the College Board website. I would not be surprised at all if you guys in your classes, or you guys even just on your own, have gone and found this prompt already. What I would say is one of the most helpful things that I do with my students is we will write responses to essays like this, then go read the sample responses from other students and see how they scored. The commentary that they give is one of the clearest ways of illuminating how to actually get like the high scores on this, and what the differences are between something that gets like a perfect score and something that scores somewhere more in the middle versus something that may be finely written but isn't picking up many points. Um, okay, cool. So again, this is the scoring rubric, quite similar. Again, all familiar. Got to have a thesis. Uh, the evidence and commentary, right? So it's a little bit different in that they don't quantify how many points you need to be making or how many different techniques you need to identify, but or I guess they sort of do. One or two, but the way we're writing it, like, you guys are definitely picking 2 techniques. As long as you're explaining how they support the purpose, you guys will be on track for a 3 or a 4, provided you get credit for 1 or 2 of them. Again, that's a sophistication point. All right, and then this last one is the argument essay. Structurally really similar to the synthesis, same approach. You just need to bring in the evidence this time. Again, I would go 2 paragraphs, 2 pieces of evidence. You don't need any kind of specific statistics. You may not even need to like have a lot of detailed knowledge about the topic, but you need concrete specific arguments as opposed to generalizations. I was giving the example earlier that freedom is good. That's a generalization. If I say instead that, like, freedom is good because sometimes because tyranny can be dangerous in that it can lead to like incredible amounts of oppression, that's a bit better. But if I can even go one step further and say, like, in the Soviet Union, the disregard for freedom created like a depressing totalitarian state. That's a specific example that illustrates my point better than those other generalizations. So that's kind of what you want to reach for, even if you're not a little bit shaky on the history or how exactly something happened. I say go for it, you guys, because they're not here. They're not going to take away points because you say something that's historically a little bit fuzzy or not quite right. If it supports your argument, you will get credit for it. We can talk some more about that if you guys want to as well. Here's an example of an argument prompt right here. So, the term I think this one's kind of cool. So they talk about like the term overrated. Talk about something that you think is overrated. So you would give an example of it, right? So you would explain, okay, so I think that this thing is overrated. You'd probably want to acknowledge somewhere why people value it highly at all. But then, so if you're going to say why it's overrated, you have to say what some of the downsides of it are. So your 2 body paragraphs should probably be about types of downsides for something. Then finally, in your conclusion, maybe, loop it back and talk about, like, again, the benefits of the thing. You can see why people like it, but ultimately it would be overrated. Okay, and then finally we have, again, this you guys are probably able to tell that the scoring rubric is somewhat similar for all these. Thesis is crucial. Evidence and commentary. If you guys take anything away from today, it's that you not only need to present evidence, make sure you present plenty of it, but also follow that formula. Present evidence. If it's from the synthesis, it's got to be summary, quote, explanation. If you're presenting your own evidence, it's evidence, then explanation of the connection to the main idea, or at least to the topic sentence, which in turn should connect to the thesis. Sophistication. Okay, cool. So again, by the way, if you guys don't know, these videos do get videos of this presentation get presented on Wyzant. So if you guys want to go back and rewatch any of what we talked through, or go reread any of the slides or anything, that will be available. That's it for the presentation. Opening things up for Q&A now. So again, like I said, I'm happy to go through any of the prompts that were already available that we looked at earlier on. I'm happy to talk about those in a bit of detail, or go back to the multiple choice. We can talk about that as well. But floor is open to you guys for whatever you want to discuss. All right, so we had I know Andrew was asking if he can download the slideshow. If you shoot me a message, Andrew, I'm happy to send you a copy of it. If just follow the link to my Wyzant profile, and I'll happily send you one. So we have Peyton asking, how do I get the sophistication point easily? Great question. There's not necessarily an easy way to do it. They really, again, they kind of try to give themselves some wiggle room on it, where like they want to give out points for things that like are like definite and not up to subjective judgment. I think the best way to get the sophistication point is, as I said, present kind of a 2-sided argument. So if it's synthesis, you want to write your thesis with an although structure. So maybe something like, although freedom can limit coordination, it is ultimately a good thing. So you're getting both sides of it. Then as you write, you want to be acknowledging the other side and meaningfully engaging with the other side of the debate. I think that's I think that's probably your best bet in terms of how to like kind of guarantee yourself that sophistication point. The other ways you can try for it is you can try to just give a lot of context to the issue at hand, whether it's like whether that's in the argument or in the synthesis essay, giving a lot of background information about like kind of like, why things are considered overrated, what types of things would be considered overrated, maybe some of the nuances of like how some things that really aren't that great still aren't considered overrated. It's got to be something that like gets some hype, but at the same time isn't that awesome. So that's kind of my suggestion in terms of trying to get the sophistication point easily. The other best way to do it is just to express your points really clearly and effectively, and in a really streamlined way where it's well organized. Your topic sentences match your thesis, etc. That's probably your best bet there. Another question. If you can only manage to get one piece of evidence per paragraph in 3 paragraphs from 3 different sources, I assume this is about the synthesis essay. So basically, if you can write 3 paragraphs with one piece of evidence each, is that acceptable? That's totally fine. Again, I would say I would probably try to write 4 pieces of evidence, just in case one doesn't count. The one thing I would say there is that if you're writing a whole paragraph about a piece of evidence, you're probably writing too much about that one piece of evidence, honestly. Like, you don't get extra points for a more thorough and like really rich analysis of things. Maybe that'll help you get the sophistication point, but still, that's only going to come into play if you present special nuance or especially well organized essays. So like, my argument would be like, I don't necessarily see the value or benefit of organizing it that way. Instead, I would write paragraphs that include more pieces of evidence, but say less about that evidence. It's going to help you rack up more points a little bit more quickly. We had another question. Are counter arguments necessary? No, they're not necessary. They're a way of scoring that extra sophistication point. If you guys just want to sacrifice that point and write like a super straight down the line, one-sided essay that does everything else really well, more power to you. You can 100% get a 5 by doing that. Another question, what would be the best way to prepare for the argument essay, since we would probably need a lot of background information on a variety of topics? The most important thing, good question. The most important thing still at the end of the day is being able to organize your thoughts really well. Like, I feel like that overrated argument question is pretty representative of like the broad type of open-endedness that's typical of those argument questions. Like, it's not necessarily that, like, you need to come up with a certain type of overrated thing. Just think instead about the things that you do know about. Which of those might be overrated, which might not be? If you're a computer person, you might think MacBooks are overrated, right? Or you might think PCs are overrated or something, right? If you're a music person, you might think Jay-Z is overrated, right? So like, think about the things you do know and love. There's not like a set topic you need to write about. Focus on what you do know and think about how to connect that to the topic. Um, as always, being generally well read and being familiar about with like a lot of different things is certainly helpful, but you do not need to if you've got solid structure and organization like we talked about, and you're able to go over and instead bring up what you do know about. Next question was if I recommend 2 or 3 body paragraphs. I write 2 because I think it's much easier to keep a streamlined, clear-headed argument altogether in 2 paragraphs. The way I teach these essays, it's kind of like, I teach people how to like get that guaranteed 4 or 5 points. Getting the sophistication is really hard and a little bit unpredictable. And honestly, I kind of more leave it to like, hey, if you write it exceptionally well, then yeah, you're going to get that extra point. Or if you want to bring in a nuanced other side to it and develop it properly, yeah, you're going to get that extra point. You guys can score a 5 on this test. Only getting, by only writing 2 body paragraphs. I think it's a little bit simpler, but if you have a lot of ideas on something, you can write 3 body paragraphs. Just make sure they're short and you can get it done in a meaningful amount of time, because time is a huge constraint on here. Another question was, what do you normally include in the intro paragraph for the essays? I keep it really simple. First sentence should be some kind of background summary of the matter at hand, some kind of general context on it. That's what I was mentioning in the outlines about like a concluding idea that links to the opening paragraph. So, if we're talking about freedom again, we might say like, freedom is hotly contested, because sometimes freedom can have sort of like dangerous aspects to it. Yet on the other side, like tyranny also can have a lot of negative consequences as well. So background context, then get right to your thesis. I don't think there's a big advantage to writing more than like a 3 or 4 sentence intro paragraph max. It's completely fine to write a 2 sentence intro paragraph. Technically speaking, you can probably get away with 1, but you're unlikely to get the sophistication point if you're not able to like give more background information and present multiple perspectives on the matter in that 1st paragraph. Um, Okay, cool. So another more general question was just what is the best way to study for this exam, except especially multiple choice? Best bet on studying for this is just practice it a lot with the answers available. This is a place where, like, working with someone that like knows tests super well, whether that's like a study group or a tutor or whoever, is really helpful because you can talk about in a more specific way what types of wrong answer, like what types of questions are you missing and why, and they can help you actually make specific adjustments and identify specific leaks or types of errors that you're making in particular, as opposed to you just being able to see the wrong answer, be like, okay, well, I missed that. Yeah, over time you're going to piece it together, like, okay, I seem to be missing a lot of answers like that. You will figure it out. It's just a lot faster if you have like other support or like, friends you're studying with. But yeah, the secret to it is just a lot of practice with some amount of feedback as well. I think reading is really helpful for a lot of things. That maybe helps with some of the background knowledge that could be helpful for the arguments too. But also just like, being familiar with the content of the multiple choice is also great because with like the types of things they're talking about in the passages is also great because like it's going to give you a little bit more understanding of what they're even saying. Another question was, is it better to quote or paraphrase evidence in synthesis in RA? Another great question. Um, Let me think about that one a little bit. I think I like to quote in order to, if nothing else, distinguish it from my correct identification of what the evidence is saying. So if you, as we said before, if you start with a summary introduction of what that section of the stimulus is saying, then quote, then explain the relationship between that quote and your topic sentence, I think that's your best bet for racking up all those points. It's not wrong to paraphrase. That is completely okay if you're tight on time. Um, in terms of paraphrasing with the rhetorical analysis, I think there's a bit more argument for it there, unless you're really analyzing specific word choices and language. It's fine to do lots of short quotes, like 2 words if you're analyzing imagery or something. But I think if you're analyzing something like structure or point of view, it's okay to paraphrase by describing what whole sections of it are doing. Again, it can be a dangerous game though. Just be really careful about making sure that you're not sliding into summary. You're explaining how choices affect the author's purpose, not just restating what the author actually said. All right, cool. So I think we actually got to wrap up because there may be one other presentation tonight. I'm not totally sure, but thank you guys so much for joining, and thanks for all the great questions. You guys were awesome on that. Like I said, if you're curious about anything else on the test or have further questions, you want a copy of the slideshow or anything like that, reach out to me through the link that they're going to paste to my page on Wyzant, and I'm happy to chat and answer anything else specific you guys have. Best of luck on the test. And if you guys are looking for more help with APs, we're doing a lot more of these presentations as well. So just keep an eye out. See ya.